here. So this is a copy of our presentation, and I'm sure it's going to be available on the website as well. First of all, I'm going to approach this as if I'm going to be the international sales director of your company. So this isn't going to be your 45-minute bank infomercial. This is going to be from things that I've learned from entrepreneurs, exporters, importers, over the years, freight forwarders, which, by the way, if I were the international director of your company, the first thing I would do is put together a team of individuals or a team of organizations that would help me grow my business. And although it does affect my ego somewhat, the bank is not the most important part of putting together your international sales plan. It's your freight forwarder, who's going to do things like help you understand Incoterms, which I'm terrible at, export-import compliance, the U.S. Department of Commerce, the SBA, Empire State Development, really all of the resources that I go through today. So this first slide, the second slide, and you can probably see it better in front of you, is what I would use and what I use as helping companies start to put together their international sales plan. Looking at the products and services that a bank has to offer, not what the bank wants you to buy, but what's best for your company. And what I want to say is any questions or comments, agreements or disagreements, just interrupt and I'd be happy to address. So when you're looking at doing business internationally, two things companies ask me. When I put together my international sales plan, do I want to hire someone, which I do suggest. When I say hire someone, I'd say hire an international sales director, as Tim mentioned, or have someone dedicated, or hire a student as part of an international trade business program that's at a college, and have them become your international sales director. So they would be able to help understand, investigate, research international business. So when you look at what is trade finance, it's really risk management. But you want to make sure that if you're exporting, how are you going to make it easy for your customer to buy from you? So you're going to want to do your research. You want to buy your credit reports and work with Tim McCall. Another good resource for credit reports is through the NACM, which is skyminder.com. And that's another resource that I've heard through a group that I was working with. And again, SkyMinder is a clearinghouse of all international trade reports. Another good resource is a trade credit insurance broker. How many of you know trade credit insurance or used trade credit insurance before? Popular in Europe for years, not so much so in the U.S. And I can tell you why, and this is, again, check it in the box of Ralph's opinion, is it kind of pisses banks off a little bit, trade credit insurance. Because when you're talking about this risk management spectrum, ultimately, as an exporter, you're going to want to go to open account, which means you're not going to use all this other stuff. Or conventional wisdom will tell you you're not going to use the rest of this stuff. But doing this for 35 years, I've learned that if you help a company go open account and they start to grow their international business, they're going to use all this other stuff and have to use all this anyway, but they're going to understand when to use it. Because going open account is the easiest way for you as an exporter to do business. So I mentioned trade credit insurance. Really, that's my last slide, trade credit insurance. But since I mentioned it, I'll start talking about it now. Open account. If you're going to open account, which means you're going to export your product, and you're going to take the risk of the buyer not paying you on time. So this is where you go out and look for trade credit insurance. The resources through the SBA, what Dan mentioned. There are brokers that sell this. Banks love it. My colleague Chet loves this because you could include domestic and foreign receivables in the borrowing base. So every bank, when you walk into a bank and you're an entrepreneur with a sales plan, as Dan mentioned, banks, even the big banks, HSBCs, Chase, we're not going to take international or foreign risk. We want those insured. So the neat thing about open account, if you're an entrepreneur, you're a new exporter, you can start to do business open account because you've insured your buyers, but you could bring that insurance policy into your bank and name your bank as loss payee. And the bank will take that insurance policy and extend credit against the insurance policy. What makes it even better is you're in control. Not that we want you to walk into 12 different banks, but you could walk into 12 different banks and say, hey, I need $1 million. And, well, we're not going to give you $1 million because of all your foreign buyers, but I have an insurance policy. How much are you willing to advance against this insurance policy? Oh, XYZ Bank, 80%? What about your 90%? And you could really have the power and position to borrow against that insurance. Going to a broker, I believe, is the best way to go. Because if you only have $50,000, $60,000 worth of foreign receivables, legend has it that the insurance companies have a minimum of $25,000. Well, if you go to an insurance company, a Coface or a Euler, yes, that's what you're going to get. But if you go to a broker, the broker will find the insurance company that will fit your particular needs. So, for example, a $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 single buyer policy through Exim is inexpensive.
60 basis points.
60 basis points, beautiful. Now, when we compare, looking at trade finance, the Exim Bank Working Capital Program, and I'll talk about that now since I started, but the Exim Bank Working Capital Program, as Dan mentioned, that's a 90% guarantee for banks. All of these programs out there are indirectly there for you. They're directly there for the banks to extend credit to you. What's nice about the Exim Bank Working Capital Program, it's a 90% guarantee. It's basically 175 basis points to use the Exim Bank Working Capital Program. If you're a delegated lender under the program, the bank keeps half of it, 75 basis points from legal. With trade credit insurance, 60 basis points, 75 basis points, you can even go up to 1%. It's less than the Exim Bank Working Capital Program and serves the same purpose. Because the Exim Bank Working Capital Program could be a little bit more expensive depending upon if your bank is a delegated lender or not. But I like the insurance because it's just a simpler, easier way for the relationship. And the credit person at your bank, like we have Chet, would look at the trade credit insurance and chances are it would be easier to approve than the Exim Bank Working Capital Program. And then we're going to get into collections, letters of credit, and cash against documents. But on the other side of the spectrum is cash in advance. Now there's a company in Rochester that I work with that their business is just strictly cash in advance. And they love it. The international director of this company loves it when banks go out to see him and says, well, you need to, quote, open account terms. And this particular international sales director, who, by the way, I'm best friends with, but hates banks. And most people do. But what he loves, he'll invite the banker in and say, well, tell me about my business. Since you're telling me I should go open an account, tell me more about my business, because you seem to know more about my business than I do. Well, this particular business, this international sales director, which, again, in my opinion, is the best international sales director you could have because he travels to visit with his customers. And he travels, maybe does a worldwide tour every 3 months. So he meets his customers. And his customers in far-flung places like Solomon Islands, Fiji. And the only way, really, they're going to be able to do business is with under cash in advance. So when you're setting thresholds and you're an entrepreneur, you're a new to exporter, you want to set thresholds, you can't have a $5,000 deal and ask your customer for a letter of credit or to work with a bank. At that point, you want to really keep the bank out of it because it's only $5,000. Credit card payments are risky because they can be disputed. But what's nice about cash in advance, it allows you to start quoting your sales in foreign currency. And that's really an entry-level way of starting to get to know trade. So you're an exporter, and you're looking to quote, say, in Europe, And it's starting to freak you out because, like, no, I'm only quoting in US dollars. And it's really funny to see because that's okay. It's back. I'm talking too long on one slide. But what's happening with foreign currency is it really gives you the opportunity to grow your international business. You could put it on your website. Part of website design is you want to get on your website and make it easy, again, for all of your customers to buy from you. So you want to be open to the fact that you want to quote in your customer's currency. Sounds risky, and again, I get the pushback from every size company. From, Joe's bait and tackle shop to Corning. Corning at one point, their systems never were able to quote in other than US dollars. But what you could do as a small to medium-sized exporter, you could call your bank. Somewhere in the bank there's a foreign currency trader. And those foreign currency traders, typically they don't like to leave the office. They sit in front of the screen. These guys will research the smallest of every transaction. So, for example, you want to have your bank do a hedging strategy. So you bring your buyer list into your bank and you say, well, we're doing business in $5,000 to $10,000, $20,000 range, and we want to start quoting in these currencies. Well, what the bank will do will look at those currencies and say, well, we could lock you in to a euro rate for 3 to 6 months. So you're not playing the spot market. You know that whatever US dollars that you have earmarked for that sale, that's quoted in euro, and that's tied back to the US dollar, so you don't have to watch the currencies. And my suggestion is never to do business under spot rate unless you like to gamble, because that fluctuates. So really, that's a foreign exchange lesson in 2 minutes. That's really all it is. Call your bank in for a hedging strategy. And now we start to look at when you need to use letters of credit. So again, you could review. But before we get into letters of credit, documentary collections is the most interesting, low-cost, misused, misunderstood product that the bank has to offer. A bank has to offer. And what anyone who's done LCs, letters of credit, before probably know is that when you're presenting documents under a letter of credit, your freight forwarder, or anyone's presenting documents under a letter of credit, you may have not negotiated that letter of credit properly, and I'll talk about how to do that properly. But most of the time, when you receive a letter of credit, you ask your customer for a letter of credit, you may not be able to prepare and present documents against that letter of credit. So what happens is your bank calls you and says, we're going to send those documents out on a collection basis. And it sounds cool, but really all the bank's doing is throwing those documents in an envelope and mailing them to make sure that your buyer pays for those goods. The neat thing about this is a great standalone product. So you've done all of your research, credit reports, you're a little uncomfortable going through open account. It's not enough to insure. But again, going back to my original point was you want to make it easy for your customer to buy from you. With the documentary collection, you're only using the bank to collect a foreign or domestic receivable. And your customer, in order to do this, they don't have to tie up a line of credit. So it's a real good balance between buyer and seller. It's really favored towards the buyer, because, again, they don't have to tie up their line of credit. The risk to you is you're going to send documents off to the bank. The bank is going to send documents off to the collecting bank. And your customer is under no obligation to pick up these goods or these documents. So to make this a secure transaction, if it's under a bill of lading, bills of lading and title documents, you want to make sure that the bills of lading are consigned to the collecting bank. And all of this is done ahead of time. You're calling your bank, you're saying, well, I'm doing business with Banco do Brazil, and I want to make sure that this bank's just not going to hand over documents to my customer. The bank will say, well, yeah, that's a top-tier bank in Brazil. We like the bank, and we'll do business with that bank. With the bills of lading being consigned to a collecting bank, a bank that you trust, you can be reasonably assured that that bank is not going to deliver those documents to the importer unless they pay for it. The risk is The importer is under no obligation to go in and pick up those documents. There's no underlying letter of credit or any type of contract. But because you've done all of your research on your buyer, you understand that this is a reputable company, that you can use a lower cost alternative to letters of credit. A documentary collection will cost you an average of $150 flat per transaction, as opposed to 1% to 1.5% using LCs. Yes?
Does it really matter the status or credibility of the bank on the other side?
Yes, absolutely. That's why you want to get your bank, your freight forwarder, your whole team involved early enough in the transaction to do all that research. You know, when I was over at HSBC, I would get emails and phone calls all day from companies saying, hey, Ralph, I'm thinking about exporting to XYZ company. We know them, but we don't know their bank. Could you give me some information on the bank? What's nice if you have a relationship with a good relationship with the bank and an insurance company, that gives you really two options, because your bank is going to be able to tell you the credibility of the collecting bank, but your insurance broker, because you could always call your insurance broker and say, hey, we're thinking about insuring XYZ company in Brazil. What do you think of the company? Would you insure it? And I've had companies come back and say, well, if the insurance company is real quick to come back and say, yes, they'll insure it, I don't need to insure it. It's a good company. And they'll do credit reports, and again, there are resources for credit reports. But yes, it's important to know. And that's what a seasoned exporter will always ask. They'll always either call the bank and ask about a particular bank, or call the bank proactively and say, I have a customer in Brazil. Could you give me 5 banks that you would work with in Brazil? And that's another way to do it. So really, for documentary collections, you're just looking at a way to move and to collect the foreign receivables. On top of this, you could do this, and we don't have time to do it in this workshop, but you can actually use a documentary collection where a bank will take the risk, foreign bank risk, and guarantee payment. So why I mentioned Brazil, South America, Central America, is interest rates are high. When you're doing business in Central and South America, interest rates are high in those countries. They're going to come to you and they're going to want extended payment terms, maybe up to 360 days. But what the bank will be looking at, similar to your question, is we're going to be financing this bank. So we're interested in it, and we're interested in this because when we finance this, when you call us and ask, we want to do business with a company in Brazil, and we're looking to finance that company for 360 days, you know, I'm making $125 on this. But if this is a good bank, we're going to take foreign bank risk and say, well, we'll charge you LIBOR, London Interbank Offering Rate, and a spread of, which is our fee, 60 to 65 basis points, a little more than 0.5%. If your customer were to borrow in country, it would be way more than that. And it's great for us because we're making 60 basis points on top of what we're making on collections. Any questions on that? Or anything else? Now, letters of credit are a whole nother animal. Letters of credit, when you start to do your research, maybe trade credit insurance is expensive, maybe it's typical that your customer uses LCs and you've made a decision that you're going to use a letter of credit. In this case, you want, again, make it as easy as possible for your customer to do business with you. Number one, you want to get your bank, your freight forwarder, involved early. You want to see a sample of that letter of credit before it's issued. At times, you want to propose what the letter of credit should look like. So your customer comes back and tells you, well, your bank, and always blame the bank, my bank suggested commercial invoice, packing list, bill of lading. And your customer will come back and say, well, who gave you that advice? My bank. Well, no. We also need a certificate of origin or other certificates. That's where the bank will call Mohawk and say, I don't know. Do you know these documents? that's why it's important you get those guys involved, because they're going to be preparing and presenting documents for that LC. So that's very important. So you have your team, but the important thing is, the bad rap with LCs is that they're expensive, nickel and dime. It's because most exporters fail to negotiate the terms up front. Now understand the buyer's pain. In order for the buyer to do business with you, they have to tie up their line of credit with their bank. So what you could do under a letter of credit is offer extended payment terms. So this is where the extended payment terms and interest rates really come into play, because again, you're doing business in a high interest rate environment, and you tell your customer, sure, well, we want a letter of credit, but we'll also give you maybe 360, 180-day terms. Now, in that case, it's on a non-recourse basis, and always remember that with your finance bank, your finance company, whatever. You always want to do business on a non-recourse basis, and I'll tell you what non-recourse is all about. Because if we take, we look at the creditworthiness of the issuing bank. If the importer presents documents and we pay the importer at site, we're going to collect whatever the balance from you 360 days. When that becomes due and we have to pay and we have a commitment to the importer, say the importer can't pay or their bank won't pay, you don't want to sign a recourse agreement where under default we have to go to your line of credit. Every international transaction should be on a non-recourse basis. Did I make that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes?
Will it really matter, even if it's going to cost you extra money, to have some expert consultant the other side to advise you regarding compliance with their own local rules?
Your compliance will most likely be handled if you guys do compliance. So we'll have global advisors. Logistics, okay. It's another thing. So yes, but all of your compliance issues would be handled by your compliance people here in the U.S. So creditworthiness of the bank, the importer, that everything would be handled here as an exporter. Financing would be handled here. Everything would be managed here. And as you start to look at, you talked about fees under the LC. If you're extending payment terms to your customer, and that's going to cost LIBOR plus 65 basis points, remember you're going to get your customer to pay that because it's less than what they would be borrowing in country. So you could really reduce the cost of the LC. Again, the cost of the LC should be 1.5%. Once you start getting into the nonsense with amendments and changes, you want the letter of credit to be a contract that works for you and your freight forwarder. It's simple. When that letter of credit arrives, when your bank advises the LC, you want to make sure you already know what it looks like. You don't want any surprises. You don't want your freight forwarder to be surprised. So once you present drafts and documents and everything is in order, it should be issuing a payment commission and maybe a SWIFT payment. It shouldn't cost you more than 1%, 1.5%. But again, once you get, if you agree to pay all of the bank charges, then you're paying the issuing bank fees. So traditionally, under the LC, is all U.S. charges should be for the exporter, all foreign bank charges should be for the importer. And then there are variations, but for the sake of time, and I started with trade credit insurance, so I was going to end with it. But again, it's a great way to look at one of your tools to help finance your foreign receivables. And one last part of that is a great story about a company in Rochester, and they weren't making anything. They were importing appliances and they selling them. And they didn't qualify for any of the Exim programs because they didn't make anything. There was no requirement, there was no U.S. production. They were able to insure their foreign receivables and domestic and get financing against that.
So banks still rely on the LIBOR, right?
Yes. Well, they price. It's going to be.
They just add,
Yes. Well, it's LIBOR and prime, so it's all risk based. So why don't you answer that, Jeff?
It depends. It really depends on the transaction. We may choose to use LIBOR against the index, or we may choose to use
Where there will be incentives of manipulation.
Yes, the LIBOR manipulation was when banks were they're pretty much a fabrication of what LIBOR rates were. I could say we were too small to be, in that case I'd like to answer that, we were too small to be involved in it. How's that?
But they just banks based in London, that's
It's not, all banks aren't created equal. In this case, I'm happy I'm with the small bank. Any other questions or comments? Am I within the time?
You're close.
Okay.
5 minutes.
Yes.
Question. This is a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Totally appreciate it. I'm wondering if you would be willing to come back in the spring and do even more of a breakdown if we get manufacturers in and give them a presentation.
Yes, and part of my comments during break was, and I've been talking to Tim about this, about educating, I think there are smaller banks, some of the community banks that have exporters that they're working with. Quite frankly, when I go to a session like this, I think there should be more people. There should be more companies. I mean, I don't know how much it costs to do this, but I think a lot of the smaller exporters are afraid to come to this because they're thinking that they're going to have to learn about a high level of trade finance. But most of the companies that I've done business with over the years, even back at HSBC, was really the basic trade finance, letters of credit, collections.
You'd be surprised how many companies in this area actually do business on the account. They've done their due diligence, they have a comfort level, they've traveled in many instances to the countries, they've met with their clients, but even so, they're willing to take the risk of not being paid.
That's right.
And work on a working basis. I run into all the time.
And to that end, just to end it, what I see in other regions, I've covered at HSBC, I've covered most of the Northeast. I still kind of do that here. But one would not think that a bank would make money by being one of 18 banks in a bank room. So there was a company in Ohio that we were doing business with, and we were brought in as the 18th bank. And I did pretty well in terms of trade with that company, even though we were in with Wells Fargo and Chase. What I don't see happening here is that if you're a Berkshire Bank client and you ask me a question about doing trade, my suggestion is to bring in a bank as a second bank to do the trade. And ultimately, looking at it from the exporter's perspective, the exporter should be thinking, okay, so if I'm a Berkshire Bank client, I'm a First Niagara Bank client, First Niagara's doing our trade business, the exporter ultimately would want to put First Niagara, put Chet in a situation where maybe the exporter comes to Chet and says, I need another $10 million. Well, we may need to bring in a third bank. And talk about participations, I don't see enough of that in upstate New York. I see the incumbent banks saying, well, no, you've got to move all of your business to us, and that's it. And that really stifles that company.
So that is something we're getting up against because we want one bank to come, we're afraid the other banks will feel, And so what are your practical suggestions for getting people to see that's sort of a new, it's a shift?
I think Chet sees this, I'm a trade finance person, more of a trade finance person than a credit person, but Chet, who I work with at HSBC, sees a lot of this. So I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
I think that what the group is doing here, the familiarity, I think that, the longer you continue to do what you're doing, publicize this, it's really going to be also up to, gaining trust and credibility with the relationship managers from the various banks in the area. And M&T has a good export group of products. I come across their clients on a regular basis. In this area, probably, of the two banks, the larger banks in the area, I would say probably First Niagara and M&T. But even some of the community banks involved in Iowa State Bank, with is to explore, particularly in the lumber industry. We see that from Delaware County all the way across. So I think it's a matter of publicizing it, maybe internally reaching out, learning who the relationship managers are in the banks locally that would. Many banks, what they'll do is they'll have a trade champion in a particular region. So find out who that person is, and then maybe even outside of this forum, put together a breakfast forum, invite those guys. Say, listen, we just want to brainstorm sessions. How could we potentially work together? We're learning that it's not unique to the Southern Tier. This is all of Central New York. Where the line is confident, right? Then let's at least have a discussion. Because ultimately what will happen is, the cream will rise to the surface. The ones who are most engaged and most interested in it, and less intimidated by it, right? They will end up being your go-to resources.
Any other questions, comments?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.